I'm happy to be back here. Happy to be back here at Land of Medicine Buddha with all of you. So let's go ahead and get started with just one prayer. Again, we're going to talk a little bit about prayers and practices later in terms of this topic of merit. But let me go ahead and share. Whoops, that wasn't the right thing to share. Somehow it clicked on that. Let's go to the actual prayers. So again, this is the Refuge and Bodhicitta prayer. I think most of you are familiar with this. We're going to recite this once in English and then twice in the Tibetan. And again, the idea behind this is we have two thoughts in here we're trying to cultivate. The first is taking refuge. And so all of you, perhaps most of you, have some contact with the Buddha's teachings already. So refuge is finding safe direction with the Buddha's teachings, really restating our confidence in the Buddha's teachings and so on, as well as the Buddha who taught them, and then what we call the Sangha or the Supreme Assembly that practice these teachings. And then the last two lines pertain to our motivation of bodhicitta, and we'll also do a short meditation on this after we do this prayer. But bodhicitta, of course, is that most supreme intention we can bring to anything we do. The idea that we want to become a Buddha so we can benefit all sentient beings. This motivation of compassion and love for all beings that is beneath this very profound thought. So let's recite this once in the English, and then I'll lead you in chanting the Tibetan as well. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodong soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyen gipe sonam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shog Sangye chodong soki choknam la Jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyan gipe sonam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shog. Sorry, my chanting voice isn't so hot tonight. All right, let's do a short meditation. Again, we're going to meditate first on the breath as a way to calm our minds, to come into this space with a bit more presence, mindfulness. So if you have a technique you already use with the breath, you're welcome to do that for the next few minutes. If you need a suggestion, then I would suggest tuning into the sensation around the tip of the nose, where you feel the air coming in when you inhale and then going back out when you exhale. And just try to keep your awareness there. And it can be challenging, as we all know, from doing even just a simple meditation. But we want to kind of observe, and whenever we see that we've wandered away from the breath, then let go of whatever distracted us and go back to the breath. So we'll do this in silence for a few minutes, and then I'll lead you in a short reflection on bodhicitta so we can kind of deepen that state of mind a bit more before we begin. So we can begin the meditation now. Now let's cultivate this motivation of bodhicitta by thinking about the starting point for all of the Buddha's teachings, which is the fact that all sentient beings are driven by a fundamental desire or need, the wish to obtain happiness and to avoid suffering. And this was something the Buddha said is just something we have to accept. This is the starting point. Every being seeking out what will make them happy, trying to avoid what causes pain, difficulty, suffering. And we can acknowledge this in our own experience in this life, how much those two forces of moving towards what brings happiness, moving away from what is suffering, the role that they play in terms of our own lives. Well, the Buddha in his observation says that we're not necessarily going about the right way to achieve those results. But nonetheless, it is achievable. We can attain true peace and happiness, and we can be free from all that disturbs our mind, everything that causes suffering for us. We have that potential within ourselves. We often refer to that as our Buddha nature, the fact that our minds can develop into the state of that complete purity and that complete fulfillment of all of our welfare and happiness. And this is true for every single sentient being. They all have that same potential. So when we generate this mind of bodhicitta, we are focused on that fact that every being is just like ourselves and just like each other in that fundamental way. And every being has the potential to achieve their complete enlightenment, their development into the state of Buddhahood. But of course, for us to help them to accomplish that, we have to become Buddhas ourselves. In the state of Buddhahood, we will have all the qualities we need to work perfectly and spontaneously for the welfare of all beings. So observing sentient beings in this way, we generate this mind that aspires to develop ourselves completely, to attain enlightenment, so we then can lead all beings to attaining that same state. And this is the most powerful, meritorious motivation we can bring to our time together, as we'll be talking about in tonight's session. So just feel your heart open with love and compassion for all beings and a desire to be here to benefit each and every one of them. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes fully and I'll start the class. So again, this is an interesting topic. Rami Johnson, who was the previous spiritual program coordinator, had been working with me some months ago about what to do in this time that I'm here. And today, as many of you know, is Losar, the beginning of the Tibetan New Year. So Happy New Year, everyone. I hope some of you were here today for some of the festivities that happened earlier. Again, in Tibet, they go with the lunar calendar, and it's not always lined up with Chinese New Year. I think Chinese New Year this year was a month ago. So essentially, they have in the Tibetan calendar, the first 2 weeks of the new year is always said to be very auspicious. And it's like in a lunar calendar, you start off with, of course, having had the new moon and then the waxing of the moon for the first half of the month, roughly, and then the waning of the moon for the latter half. So we're in that period where there's the waxing of the full moon and the full moon day, which happens to be March 5th, 14th, I think, Friday, 2 weeks from today, is said to be the most auspicious of all of these first few days of the Tibetan New Year. So this idea of what's merit got to do with it really pertains a lot to today as well as to these first 2 weeks, but also, of course, to every day of our lives. So we're going to talk about the role that merit plays, what merit is. It's a word that's thrown around a lot in Tibetan Buddhism in particular, but I always struggle to find like an analogy in our everyday mundane life. It's kind of hard to find one that works perfectly. In some sense, it's kind of like the money that you have in your account. that sort of allows you to do what you need to do to keep yourself fed and pay your insurance and whatever else needs to happen in order to live a normal life, right? We have to have something there that we can draw from in order to have what will bring us some measure of security, safety, comfort, happiness. And it's not identical, but essentially, merit is that force that allows us to have all of what brings happiness to us in our lives. Let me share a few slides. I did put a little slideshow together for tonight, not too many slides, but give us an opportunity to discuss some of these issues. On this front screen are a few things that I'll be talking about a little bit later. The small prayer wheel that's on the left there, you know, the big prayer wheel out in the parking lot here that's really quite wonderful. The water bowl offerings in the center there, and various other offerings similar to what the offerings here in the Gompa, and then what's called a mandala offering, which I'll talk about a little bit later as well. Obviously, offerings have a lot in Buddhism to do with merit. But let's look at this first topic of what is merit, and of course, why do we need it? Why is it so essential? Why do we talk about it a lot of the time? Lama Zopa Rinpoche, our spiritual director, used to talk about it frequently. We'll look a little bit more in the next part about how do we accumulate merit? What are the activities that will help us to kind of put more money in the bank, if you will? And then what makes our merit more extensive? What are the things that really allow it to grow and develop and to, bring about amazing results? And then finally, how do we keep it from being damaged? Because it is said that we can deplete our merit or in some way cause it not to be quite as powerful. So this is the definition. I took this from we have part of our organization called the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archives. That is where a lot of Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe's teachings have been kind of put online, and there are books that they produce. They're a wonderful part of our organization. And they have a glossary as part of that website. And this is how they define merit. In Tibetan, by the way, this is the word sonam. It's positive imprints left on the mind by virtuous or Dharma actions. Dharma, of course, being the teachings of the Buddha, where he's giving us instruction about how to create more positive actions. These are the principal cause of happiness. Essentially, merit is nothing more than virtuous karma. I'm going to talk a little bit about karma because I think it's really important that if you don't have an understanding of karma, that you at least come away with a clearer view of what karma is in terms of Tibetan Buddhist teachings. If we look at how karma is used in our everyday Western language, it's kind of an interesting phenomenon because it tends to focus only on what we call these negative results. Like if you see somebody who's really badmouthed somebody else and then they get badmouthed by somebody, you go, oh, that's their karma. But we don't think about the role that karma plays in regard to our positive experiences. And karma is essentially the mechanism by which we have all of our experiences. Karma, in this Sanskrit word, essentially means action. Often in the West, too, we're referring mostly to the result and not the actual cause. The cause of all of our experiences are these actions. And by actions, we tend to think, well, actions are something we do physically or verbally, but even our minds create karma. And in fact, that's where our karma is primarily created, is through the thoughts that we have and of course, actions of our body and speech that we engage in on the basis of those thoughts. And karma is a topic that you could spend many, many sessions looking at. But in essence, it is once more the law of cause and effect, that if you create these particular causes, you have particular results or effects. That is a subset of the way that we see cause and effect playing out in our world. I always point out that whenever I'm teaching on karma, I point out that in terms of our physical world, we have great confidence in the law of cause and effect, right? Here we are, moving into springtime. If you have a part of your yard or something where you want to grow a vegetable garden, you know that you have to create the causes for it. You don't just sit there looking out your window every day and go, where are my vegetables? Where are my vegetables? But you never do anything with that plot of land, right? You have to actually go out there and create the causes to have all those wonderful vegetables at the end of summer and into fall or whatever. So we know this in terms of physical things in our world. We're very attentive to cause and effect. And look at how scientists and so on are constantly researching, well, what's the cause of this in terms of climate change and all these various things going on in our world, trying to pinpoint things so that we can then have some effect on what we are experiencing on the basis of changing the causes. Well, karma is a subset of that whole idea of cause and effect. In particular, though, it's talking about our experiences as sentient beings. And for some reason, we have a harder time accepting that there's some principle behind what we experience compared to growing vegetables in our garden. So it's essentially the same principle that's guiding all of it. The biggest problem that we have with karma, of course, in developing that conviction in this is because it's not immediate. I know John Lennon saying instant karma and, kind of put forward that idea, but there is no such thing as instant karma because every action that we do is like planting a seed on our minds, and that will eventually ripen into a result. If we have a result that immediately follows the planting of that seed, doing that action, well, that's probably the ripening from a previous action that came perhaps earlier in this life or even lifetimes ago. Of course, all of the principle of karma is taught in Buddhism within the context of rebirth. The fact that we are not in a single life with a bookend of our birth and our death, and that's it. And Western scientists, many of them still hold to that very materialistic view that this is all that there is. You are born, and at some point, consciousness starts in the womb, and then it continues until you die, and then your consciousness ends. But Buddhism says consciousness has a continuity. Consciousness is always arising from something that is the same nature as it, which is a previous moment of consciousness. So the first moment of consciousness in this life was preceded by another moment of consciousness, and so on, all the way back with no beginning. Just kind of mind blowing for a lot of people, but nonetheless, this is what the Buddha taught. There is no beginning to your consciousness, it has always been here. And your consciousness will continue even into Buddhahood. Consciousness continues when you attain that supreme final result of your own enlightenment. So essentially, karma is the guiding principle created by consciousness, our actions that we engage in, again, primarily through our minds, and then what our minds direct our speech and our bodies to do. And it is experienced in our minds, sometimes with physical and verbal, components to it, but it is always a ripening of our own experience. So this is the Buddha's explanation for why we are experiencing particular things. So merit is referring in a very direct way to the positive things that we do. As was said in that definition, it's the cause of all of our happiness. There are four principles or characteristics that guide how karma works. And so when we talk about these being positive imprints, they are positive imprints that ripen into happiness. This is one of the very first, or the very first principle that I want to go over briefly, because once more, if you don't kind of have the context for karma, merit doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. This very first general characteristic, karma is certain or definite. It doesn't mean that it's definite to be experienced. It's definite in that it will create something that is commensurate and in the same vein as what you have started with. It's the same thing in nature. We see this, right? And if you planted an apple seed and in the same spot where you planted the apple seed, an avocado tree grew, you'd be like, what the heck was that? Where did that come from, right? In the other hand, if you planted an avocado seed and you got an apple tree, you'd be very confused as well, right? So we see that avocado seeds bring forth avocado trees. Apple seeds bring forth apple trees. Very similar principle. In karma, we're talking about essentially two flavors of karma. There are three in that we can also create neutral karma. The Buddha didn't talk about neutral karma so much, mostly talked about our virtuous karma and our non-virtuous karma. The virtuous karma will bring forth happiness as its results. Kind of makes sense, right? Because it's the same way it works in nature. If you have something that is an apple seed, it's going to bring forth something in its same kind of nature, its own continuum, an apple tree. So that's what positive karma brings about, is the result of happiness. Negative karma, non-virtuous karma, on the other hand, brings about suffering. Whoops, I keep hitting this, sorry. Not keep hitting it. It's the second time I hit it. I'll try not to hit it again. So again, those non-virtuous actions we engage in, they will eventually ripen into some suffering experience, some painful experience for us. So this is the very first principle that dictates that there's a definiteness to this. It's not random. It's not like we get these happy results from creating non-virtue, or that we get suffering results from creating virtue. It's very delineated and will always follow that rule. The second of these characteristics, let me put it on the screen, is this idea of karma increasing or expanding. This is a really important one because the idea there does have its way of being mirrored in nature. And let's go back to the apple seed, right? You start with something that's as small as an apple seed. Apple seed is quite tiny, right? Compared to an avocado seed, which is much larger. But if we plant that little apple seed in the ground, and in the case of nature, it does require other causes and conditions. It requires the nutrients of the soil. It requires the sunlight and the warmth and what have you. And the rain, all of that to produce an apple tree. And then that apple tree produces many, many other apples over time. You can see that from that one little cause, you get this immense results, right? Bushels and bushels of apples that come from just that one little seed. Well, karma has something similar. It's not identical, but essentially, once we plant that seed on our minds, whether it's non-virtuous or virtuous, it continues to grow and expand day by day into something much, much larger than what we started with. And of course, that's wonderful in terms of the positive karma, right? I can get all kinds of amazing, wonderful results from that. In terms of the negative karma, not such a great thing, right? Because even something small that I do that is negative can bring forth amazing suffering over time. This is just, again, how karma works. I'm just going to review these. Many of you have had teachings on these, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but it is important to understand these basic principles about how karma functions. The third and the fourth one I see as sort of corollaries to each other. The third one says you cannot experience the results without creating the karma that is their cause. Right? So you can't get the apple tree if you didn't plant the apple seed. It makes sense, right? How would you possibly get the apple tree without having planted its seed? It's the same in regard to our results that we experience. We cannot experience something without having done the work of planting the seeds of karma that will ripen into that. Of course, related to this is the idea that if you are experiencing a result in your life, guess what? You created it. That's your karmic seed that you must have created, or you couldn't experience that result. So those two thoughts are behind that number three. Number four is speaking to the fact that if we have done something, created that cause, then we won't lose the result. The result will happen eventually. Karmic results will definitely arise from whatever seeds we have planted. Now, there is a little footnote to that. And that's what we're going to get into at the end of tonight when we look at this idea of how do we destroy potentially our positive seeds that we planted. Certainly the negative seeds that we planted, most of us involved with Tibetan Buddhism for some time know that you can do a process of purification. At the end of every day, or as frequently as you'd like to, you can engage in purifying all those negative actions, removing those seeds so that they don't create their results. So this fourth one isn't as definite in terms of actions that we've done, karma we've created, we will definitely experience the result. It depends. If that result, if that karmic seed is damaged in some way, the result may or may not come. So these four principles are really important to understand because this is what we're talking about with merit in regard to our positive actions, is that we want to create more and more and more positive seeds, not out of a selfish motivation alone. And again, merit, I'll talk a little bit more about it in a moment. It does have this connotation, especially about the store of positive potential that we need to create in order to experience these more ultimate results, such as our own liberation, our own enlightenment, and so on. But nonetheless, the idea is that if we kind of look at this idea of merit, we're really essentially talking about virtuous karma. Virtuous karma being what will bring about your happiness and the happiness of all beings eventually through your becoming enlightened. So merit's a very important concept, especially again in the Mahayana tradition, where you are using that main goal of becoming a Buddha for the sake of all beings. There's this, let me go ahead and I think I'll go to the next slide is where I talk about this a little bit more, or in that next section. So this is where we're going to kind of examine these two different types of results. We certainly can acknowledge that merit, or as positive karma, as this virtuous energy we're creating, if you will, does create our temporal happiness. It creates, it has created your human rebirth. Every one of you is a human being, an amazing state of existence that is a definite result of having created positive karma. That's the only way you could have attained this human rebirth. And so those good rebirths all arise from merit, all arise from this positive potential, and even the favorable conditions that we have. I mean, every one of us here is looking fairly well fed and, has probably a roof over your head and have a lot of different things in your life that are bringing you some measure of happiness in this existence. That's through your own positive potential as well. Those things did not come from nowhere. They came from their respective causes, which were the virtue you engaged in, either earlier in this life or in other lifetimes, that have ripened into this result. So there is that temporal component to it, and it's not denying that those bring us some measure of happiness. But what's the problem with that level of happiness? It's not something that will ultimately satisfy. How many temporal pleasures have we all had in our life, right? Look, it's to go all the way back to when you were quite young till now. How much delicious food have you eaten? How many wonderful things have you seen? Beautiful sunsets, been out in nature with mountains and all kinds of things, listened to, wonderful music, all the various things that we've experienced. They haven't really made us kind of more deeply happy. They've made us happy in the moment, but then we always have to go back to them again and again and again. This is one of the main teachings the Buddha gave in his very first discourse, that a lot of these things that we experience that we call pleasure are not really true pleasure. They don't really get to the root of the problem. That's why we need merit, particularly for the other result, which are what we call here ultimate happiness. Again, there are two of these, liberation and enlightenment. Liberation is where we do have, by the way, can you maybe get the boxes there off just so folks can see in the go? But that's great. Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it. They can't see me up there, but they don't know that they need to see me up there. Thanks for doing that, Leah. So again, we have these two different results that the Buddha taught, liberation and enlightenment. Liberation is where you've attained your own freedom from your own causes of suffering. And we all have the potential to do that. But that's not the final result. The final result is what we call here enlightenment or Buddhahood. And that's where we have not just removed the causes of our own suffering, we've removed everything that keeps us from being able to benefit all beings. Uh, the obscurations that stop us from having an omniscient mind and being able to work effectively for the welfare of all others. So essentially, that's the more ultimate happiness that we're primarily talking about when we use this term merit. Not saying that merit isn't involved in creating your temporal happiness, but we're mainly focused on how do we make sure we create this store of positive potential that can be generated over many lifetimes, perhaps, to get us to that state where we have achieved our ultimate welfare, especially again, Buddhahood or enlightenment. And that's where this bottom line here, where it says merit of virtue and merit of wisdom. I want to talk a little bit about that. I mean, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, the spiritual director for our organization, there was kind of early on, we would often talk about merit as being one of the two wings of a bird that allows you to fly to the goal of enlightenment. It's kind of a nice analogy in some regard, because if you have a one-winged bird, it's not going to be able to fly at all, right? Just unfortunately, it won't be able to even get up off the ground. It needs both wings in order to fly to its destination. So we would frequently talk about how we have the wing of merit, which is kind of our compassionate motivation and all the stuff we do on the basis of that positive potential that we need to like put money in our bank account or gas in our tank or whatever that will get us there. But then we need the kind of wing of wisdom. Wisdom is, of course, the deeper knowledge of things that will allow you to attain that result as well. It's kind of, this is the energy or force behind it, but this is the actual mechanism. The wisdom is what will actually get you to that state. Because once we begin to see the nature of reality at a deeper level, that's the actual cause for removing everything that obscures your mind, which is, by the way, the topic of Sunday's talk, where I talk about simplifying emptiness. I hope I can do that in the course of a day, but emptiness is referring to what that wisdom knows. That wisdom knows that things don't exist in a false way that we are incorrectly holding on to. We need to find a way to undermine that. So we would frequently talk about these as being kind of two separate things, merit and wisdom, merit and wisdom. Lama Zopa made it clear that in his mind, they're both merit. We have merit of virtue, which is the virtuous actions that we're talking about here tonight. It's the positive potential that we keep putting in the tank so we can make sure we have everything we need to get to our destination. But then we need the merit of wisdom, which is also, of course, meritorious. When we develop that wisdom that is discerning the nature of things at the deepest level, and also even discerning things at a more conventional level, understanding all of what the Buddha taught in a very profound way, that will be its own force that helps us to remove all of our ignorance, all of our obscurations. But these two work in tandem. And you have to have both there in order to get to the final goal, just like a bird needing both of its wings to fly to its destination. So again, I just wanted to point that out because sometimes we do have a tendency of just, kind of calling what's over here merit, but missing that this is also meritorious. This is also something we need to develop. So in essence, if it comes down to it, we could say merit is our whole path. It's not just the virtuous actions that we engage in that are more outwardly oriented and what have you, or, things in, as I'll go through tonight, many of the ways that we accumulate merit. It is also the merit of wisdom that we need to cultivate and develop so we can actually, again, remove what is obscuring our minds. I know I'm putting all this in a very brief language, but this is the fundamental path that we are talking about in developing our minds into the state of Buddhahood. But even in regard to our own liberation, there is some level of merit obviously required there, and you have to have that merit of wisdom because you have to be able to remove everything that's keeping you in this round of existence, going from life to life. So merit plays a pretty big role in regard to both of these types of results. Again, your more temporal results of gaining some measure of happiness or pleasure in your life from life to life, but it also is playing a profound role in helping you to obtain these more lasting states of well-being. Your own liberation, your freedom from cyclic existence, as it's called, samsara, as well as the eventual state of enlightenment. So that's, again, just a little bit more about, why we need it. It's essential for us to attain good existences and so on, as well as to get to those more final results that the Buddha taught. I also want to point out how merit is frequently discussed in the context of two important activities we have to engage in. One of them is called the accumulation of merit. Like we have to be focused on making sure that we're putting more and more gas in the tank or money in the bank or whatever we want to relate it to in our everyday lives. But the second activity is the purification of negativities. A wonderful example for this is if we consider our minds to be like a bed of soil. I know I already used the example of a vegetable garden, but let's say you want to make a flower garden. You need a nice bed of soil that is going to be able to sustain the growth of those flowers. Well, it needs to have two elements to it, right? First, you have to get all the weeds and all the rocks and everything out of there that's going to impede the growth of the flowers, right? That's your purification. That's the removal of everything that is getting in the way. Whereas you also need to make sure that the soil is rich with nutrients and things that will support the growth of the flowers. So essentially, you have these two tasks that you're engaged in with growing a nice flower garden. With regard to our minds, we need both of those tasks as well. We need to kind of remove what are these um, unhealthy ways of having acted and continuing to act and so on through addressing our negative karma, through doing purification practices and so on, and eventually doing deeper purification of our minds through wisdom. And we also need to accumulate merit, positive potential, like putting the things that enrich the soil into our minds. So this is another way that merit is frequently talked about as being an essential practice. In fact, Lama Tsongkhapa, he had a lot of merit himself. Lama Tsongkhapa was the founder of our tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. He lived from 1357 to 1419. It's kind of interesting. I always think about those dates in Western culture, like in European culture. Things where it was the Middle Ages, right? It was not such an advanced time. And here you have this, Tibetan great thinker, philosopher who was just profound in so many of his writings. Lama Tsongkhapa is quite amazing. Lama Tsongkhapa had purified his merit and karma so much that he had these amazing visions of this being called Manjushri. Where is Manjushri? It must be in here somewhere. Just behind the projector. Okay. Manjushri is this is a Buddha that appears in the form of like being a very youthful being with an orange body, and he's holding a flaming sword of wisdom. And in his other hand, he has a lotus upon which are the perfection of wisdom texts. So he's all about wisdom. He's all about developing that side of the path. Lama Tsongkhapa had his kind of this energy of the Buddhas appearing to him in this form, and he received these amazing teachings from Manjushri. Manjushri said there are three things we need to do in order to achieve realizations on the path. The very first one is this accumulation of merit and purification of negativities. And we see, in the West, we don't think in this way often around like if you decide that you want to go into a particular branch of study, say you want to, become a computer expert or whatever, where you're going to study all kinds of languages, computer languages, and know how to do programming and so on, all the various things involved in that. Maybe go into AI now, all of this technology. If that's kind of something that interests you, we think, oh, all I have to do is I just go there. Sure, I pay my money for the tuition or whatever, and I just study and I work hard at studying and making sure that I gain that knowledge. In the West, that's how we tend to think of things, right? Well, when Manjushri appeared to Tsongkhapa, he said, one of the most important things you have to do is you have to accumulate merit and you have to purify your negativities, or you're never going to gain realizations. Even Lama Zopa Rinpoche, this was one of, well, the last time that I had teachings from him. We were doing these 2-week retreats in North Carolina near Asheville. And at that retreat, he was talking about how when you want to develop deep meditation practice, where you get the mind very single pointed, this is to develop what we call calm abiding. Once more, you might think, oh, well, all I have to do is get the time off work and go off and retreat and then have the, dedicate myself to sitting on my cushion and I'm going to get calm abiding. He says it's not how it works. You need merit to gain realizations of calm abiding, to gain that state of mind. So once more, we don't think like that in the West so much. We think, oh, I just put my nose to the grindstone and do all of what needs to be done and I'll get the result immediately. Well, no, you have to do all this preliminary work that allows you to gain those realizations. The other two, by the way, after he said that accumulate merit and purify negativities, make single-pointed requests to your teachers and the Buddhas, so that you really kind of become a conduit for their energy to help you, inspire you, and bless you on your path, which is something too we don't think about so much in the West. And then third, of course, is the actual task of meditating on the stages of the path, meditating on all the topics that we teach at all of our centers, what's called the Lam Rim, the stages of the path. So essentially, these are the three things that we have to do. And once more, most of us might think, well, I only need to do the third one. All I need to do is just study the Lam Rim a lot and meditate on it, and I'll gain all these realizations. You need to accumulate merit. I'm not going to talk about the purifying negativities thing so much tonight, but the accumulation of merit is essential. So again, that's just a little discussion on the basis of the way Rinpoche presents these is two types of merit, essentially, the merit that we call the merit of virtue and then the merit of um, wisdom, and that we need to accumulate both of those, essentially, if we are ever to achieve any major realizations on the path. So how do we do this? Of course, in Tibetan Buddhism, there are many techniques for doing this, and I'm going to go through them in a kind of brief way. I don't want to spend too much time on them because I do want to have some time to open it up for any questions or comments. But I've put them into four main categories. Of course, the last one is a catch-all for a number of things. And that's where I will address things like even just gauging in good virtuous behavior in terms of our everyday life. But in this tradition, we do emphasize a lot of these first three offering practices and a variety of those. I'll go into those first. And then practices that are related to prayers and even mantras. I'll talk a little bit about what mantras are and won't go into great detail on that. Lama Zopa, there's a book of his teachings on the power of mantra. The third is practices related to holy objects, which can be something that's a little challenging, I think, in our culture. But the idea that holy objects having a particular place in regard to our accumulation of merit. And then again, we'll look at other activities, practices that are meritorious for us. But offering is a big one. Of course, you can do offering by simply visualizing offerings, as it says in that first one, or actual offerings. I was pointing out earlier that little picture of the water bowls, and again here in the Gompo we have water bowls on the altars. Water bowls are a practice that many people begin with. It's said to be a good place to start with our practice of generosity. Of course, I don't know what it was like in Tibet. Of course, they're at a very high elevation, but they have all the snow on the mountains, so maybe they have water around a lot, and it becomes a very easy resource to make offerings of. But nonetheless, in our culture, water has gotten to be a bit more scarce, perhaps. But nonetheless, it's said to be a fairly easy practice, and there's a whole ritual for doing this. I'm not going to talk about all of that tonight, but it's not just, oh, I'm going to fill up a bunch of bowls with water. It's actually a meditation practice. It's actually something where we are thinking about what we are doing and adding another layer of meaning to everything that we do. I mean, for example, when you take the bowls, when you're cleaning them before you put the water in them, you wipe them away from you 3 times to clarify all of your body, speech, and mind, remove all those negativities, and then you wipe 3 times towards yourself to bring in the blessings of the body, speech, and mind of all the holy beings. So essentially, everything has meaning to it. It's not just I'm just going to throw a bunch of bowls of water on the altar. So making altar offerings, physically is certainly a wonderful thing to do. And it doesn't have to be water bowls. You can offer flowers, you can offer bowls of fruit, you can do whatever. But the point is to be kind of sending that energy out. Now you might think, well, what's happening with all the Buddhas that you're offering to? Well, again, they're already blissed out. Don't worry about them so much. They're there as a basis for us to create merit. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later when I talk about these various bases for making offerings. But they're there essentially because they're such supreme beings as an opportunity for us to make offerings to them. This is something that ideally those of you who are practicing Buddha should have an altar at home where you are making daily water bowl offerings. It really is important. And water bowl offerings can be done even as a preliminary practice where you make hundreds of thousands of them. Venerable Angie, who's a Scottish nun who's in the Bay Area. She's at our Center Vajrapani Institute, where I'm going to after I leave here in a week. Um, she's done extensive water bowl offerings. She used to do water bowl offerings at Lama Zopa Rinpoche's house in Aptos when that was operating. Those of you who don't know, Lama Zopa passed away 2 years ago almost. April 13th will be the 2-year anniversary. We're kind of waiting for his reincarnation. But so the idea here in the first one is making actual and even visualized offerings of sense objects. You can sit there and just, put your hands together and just visualize sending out all kinds of beautiful offerings. It's very powerful, very meritorious. The second one is making these mandala offerings. Remember, I showed you that on the screen. I don't know if do we have a mandala offering that's kind of out? I don't know if there's one here. Some centers, actually put one out that's kind of residing there on the altar or what have you. It's representative of the entire phenomenal world. And there is like a mechanism for making those if you're making them yourself with these rings and the base and what have you. And it's really a beautiful offering. I sometimes find that I enjoy doing it when I feel like I've been too much in my head and I need something that's more kinesthetic, like working with your hands or what have you. Because it's where you essentially take this base and you're piling all of these semi-precious rocks and what have you, substances on these various levels with these rings that hold it all in place. And then you're visualizing making this vast pure offering, which is essentially the goal of all of our spiritual path, for each of us to attain what we might call our Buddha Pure Land, our completely purified realm. We are making this vast pure offering and imagining all beings being able to achieve enlightenment on the basis of that. So it's a very powerful practice. Again, I can't go into all the detail of that tonight, but this is also one of what we call our preliminary practices or ngondro. I might say a little bit about this concept of preliminary practices. They're very meritorious. This is where we gain so much of our merit for the path. And in the West, I think we have a tendency of discarding those things, not being so attentive to them. We're like, oh, they're preliminary. I don't need preliminary practices. I'd want the actual practice. Well, if you can't do the actual practice without the preliminary practices, I remember when I first started my Buddhist path it's about 32 years ago, not quite 32 years ago. In the Nyingma tradition, I mentioned Lama Tsongkhapa, he's the Gelugpa tradition, which is the last to form. The Nyingma tradition was founded by Shantarakshita and Padmasambhava, Guru Padmasambhava, often called Guru Rinpoche. An amazing lineage it goes back to, but they emphasize right from the beginning that you should engage in the preliminary practices before even doing any major study or what have you, which takes a lot of faith on the part of Westerners to just walk into something and say, oh, I'm going to start reciting all these mantras and doing all these water bowls and whatever. But these are really important practices to attend to. Because once more, this isn't like the way that we go about achieving things in the West. In the West, once more, you just put your nose to the grindstone and go do the work, and then you get your degree and you're done. When it comes to achieving enlightenment, you have to have that component of merit and again the purification of negativities and so on, those two things acting in tandem to create the basis upon which you will be able to achieve realizations. Many people go off, and even Rinpoche talked about that in that last teaching I heard from him, where he said, people will go off and they do 2, 3 year retreats. And not that they waste their time, not he wasn't saying that, but he said they just struggle to gain realizations. Why? Because they haven't done the preliminary work. So these preliminary practices in Tibetan, this is called ngondro, Ngondro, ngondro. And these are really important to pay attention to make sure that we've done some of that groundwork that will be the foundation upon which all of these realizations occur. So one of the practices is water bowl offerings in particular, though again, you can make any type of offerings. Mandala offerings, these kind of representations of the phenomenal world being purified and offered. And then, of course, offering of our own practice and service. This is one of the most profound ways that we, of course, attend to um, fulfilling the requests of our gurus. And what they really want of us, what all of our teachers want of us, is for us to actually practice what they are giving us in terms of teachings. If we go to a lot of teachings and we accumulate a lot of knowledge and we fill up notebooks with all the things we've heard, but we never really practice those things, well, that's kind of ridiculous, right? That's like having very powerful medicine and being ill, but you never take the medicine because you think it's just meant to be observed and held or something. I don't know. We have to actually take the medicine of the Dharma. We have to practice it. So our own practice can become an offering of sorts, especially if we've received advice from our teachers, our gurus. If you go to them and they say, oh, what you should do is this, or what you should do is that, well, then do those things. Take them seriously. They're not giving you just casual advice. They're telling you what, from their observation, is really important on our path. So this is something to kind of be attending to, is to make sure that we have offered our practice as well to our teachers. The other thing that was mentioned there was our service. Again, I don't want to talk too much about that, but I do feel like it is important that we find ways to serve our teachers. Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, the lamas that were behind this whole organization that Land of Medicine Buddha is a part of, it's not that they couldn't accomplish everything on their own, but they were greatly aided by many, many students who offered their service, who said, okay, I'll run a Dharma center. Okay, I'll do this for you. I'll raise money. I'll do this. That all of these things are how the Lama's wishes are fulfilled, essentially. Offering service means being a staff person here or a volunteer here or just helping in what ways that you can. This is all part of what we would call, the Lama's mandala. We're, kind of serving them by attending to the centers and the needs of our centers and what have you. So service is also a wonderful way, but of course, I'm not trying to make it solely about this organization and the lamas here. We can also, of course, offer service in regard to people in our community who are of need. That's what we get to in this last point when I bring up this idea of there being three fields of offering. The first one is the offering to the fields of excellence. What does that mean? That means these beings who we do see have these amazing, excellent qualities. I didn't never knew Lama Yeshe. Known Lama Zopa, but they could obviously, from looking at them and the teachings they gave and recordings of them and everything, you can see that they were pretty excellent beings. They pretty much had a lot of outstanding qualities. That's the first field, and that's the one that I've been emphasizing to some degree already. But the second one, there is also offerings to what we call the field of benefit. Who are in the field of benefit? Anyone have any idea? The idea here is that these are beings who have benefited you. I'm sure certainly our gurus have. I'm not saying that, but this is kind of a second category. Our parents, big one, right? Yeah. Our parents, and certainly the beings who gave you this body, if you weren't raised by your natural parents, then certainly those beings that the parents that you had there also played a profound role. But really, those who gave you this body, that's an amazing kindness. Yeah, we don't think of it in that terms necessarily in the West. Maybe some people even regret that their parents gave them birth or what have you. But most of us, again, should try to see our parents as being pretty supreme um, objects in terms of how much we have benefited from them. We wouldn't all be here if it wasn't for the kindness of our parents, right? So parents are often on that list. Many other people perhaps have benefited us throughout our lives. Those are important beings to be generous and kind to make offerings to. Once more, not something we kind of think about top of mind, but that's a useful way for us to accumulate some merit because those beings have played a profound role in terms of your well-being right now. As I said, you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for their amazing kindness. The last one is the field of suffering. What this means is those beings who are dealing with the grosser forms of suffering that we have at times, but perhaps they're experiencing more constantly. Those who are unhoused, those who don't have the food that they need, those who need medicine, all the various things that we see in our world and even in our own communities where we can be attentive to those needs. So don't think only in terms of, although I've phrased a lot of these in terms of thinking about our lamas, our gurus, and all of that, making offerings with them in mind, the Buddhas, but there are also these other two fields, the fields of benefit and the fields of suffering. And those really important things to attend to. I know a lot of people, when they come to Mahayana Buddhism, they get ingrained this idea that I'm becoming enlightened so I can then benefit others. Like it becomes a, if I don't have that state of enlightenment, then I can't benefit others. But that's not what the Buddha is saying at all. He's saying essentially you won't be able to benefit others perfectly or completely until you're enlightened. But nonetheless, you can benefit beings right now. You can benefit animals. You can benefit many beings that are in a suffering state. And so we should be attending to that and not kind of saying, oh, well, my meditation practice is more important or what have you. Your meditation practice is important, don't get me wrong. But it's also important that we become active in our world, attending to the suffering of beings. In fact, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has often said that he feels that in the West, certainly many Christian traditions have done a better job of that than what Buddhists do. And here we are with bodhicitta. I want to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings, but I don't necessarily tend to my neighbors who have problems and difficulties. We have to be willing to extend ourselves day in and day out to those who are in need. You know? Go to the food banks to distribute food or do whatever it is that will help to alleviate the suffering in the moment. That's not, we know it's not going to get rid of their suffering once and for all, but it helps. Everything helps. And it also helps to enlarge our own heart, to not feel like we're sort of just kind of concerned about our own enlightenment and what have you, and to really think about the suffering of other beings. So maybe that's enough on offerings. Offering practices are a really key way that we create merit. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about how we bring a most positive state of mind to those. There are also practices related to prayers and mantras, attending pujas, which are essentially devotional and offering ceremonies. In fact, there's going to be a puja here tomorrow for Venerable Ingrid, the nun who passed away not too long ago. They're going to do a medicine Buddha puja. This is Land of Medicine Buddha, a very powerful practice that people do together. This is a very, again, meritorious practice. What's kind of interesting about pujas, you can do a puja on your own. I mean, nobody said you can't. But when you come together and do practice, especially prayers like that and pujas, offering ceremonies, it's very, very powerful merit. One of my teachers in Italy, Geshe Tenzin Tempo, he said that often in the monasteries, they use the example of like the straw that's part of a broomstick, right? The broom part of it where you sweep. If you just had one little piece of straw and you were trying to clean a room, you know, how long would it take, right? You'd be there forever. But because you put all of these together and you create this really very powerful movement, you can clean a room really quickly, right? The idea behind that is that if we come together in practice, where we are gathered with like-minded people, we can do amazing things together. You can accumulate unbelievable positive potential together. So it's a wonderful analogy to show how doing things on our own, sometimes that's great, sit in your own room with your own altar or whatever and do your practices. But it's really important to come together. Again, maybe something also that was a little foreign to us in the West, but there's a lot of logic to it that we can create much more profound and powerful results through doing things together. Reciting mantras, the word mantra itself means mind protection. And mantras are essentially the vocalization of a particular Buddha's energy, if you will, what that Buddha represents. Most of you know the basic mantra of the Buddha of compassion, Avalokiteshvara, Om Mani Padme Hum. There's a longer mantra that's quite long, but nonetheless, all of these mantras are really the essence of that Buddha. So when we say Om Mani Padme Hum, we are bringing into our awareness the resonance of that Buddha of compassion. And so these are said to be very meritorious practices because it's like we're connecting with that Buddha energy. The mantra of Manjushri, who I was mentioning earlier, is Omarapatsana Di. You can do that as a very powerful way to create that merit of wisdom to help remove the obstacles to realizing that profound wisdom. For the medicine Buddha, Tayata Om, Bekenze Bekenze, Maha Bekenze Bekenze, Raja Samangate Soha. And there's a longer version of that one as well. But these are, again, the essence of those Buddhas that we're trying to work with, bring to mind, receive their blessings, their inspiration, and do a lot of, purification and accumulation of merit in the process of using those. So again, mantras are very, very powerful. I'm not going to say much more on that. Well, I mentioned earlier that Lama Zopa Rinpoche, they just published a set of teachings, many teachings he gave on mantra, called The Power of Mantra. So if you're curious about mantra, you can use that book as a resource to help you to become more inspired to use mantras. And by the way, there are some wonderful, beautiful recordings of people singing mantras. So if you don't like just reciting them yourself, you can sing along with the mantras and what have you. And it's useful also to give those mantras, recite those mantras around other beings who will benefit from those mantras, hearing them, even if they don't understand them, they can kind of imprint on their minds. Also making or using prayer flags and prayer wheels. I think there was a prayer flag thing today, right? As part of what you did on the grounds here. Yeah. Oh, it's tomorrow. I'm sorry. I had the wrong dates on that. What time is that tomorrow? Yeah, 11 o'clock tomorrow. So they're going to put new prayer flags up by the Mahabodhi Stupa, right? Yeah. So again, prayer flags, again, the principle behind them is that there are prayers printed on them, and then when the wind, goes through them, blows the prayer flags, the prayers go out, across lands and to beings and what have you. But it's just very meritorious to think that way, to think I'm going to create prayers and beneficial circumstances for all beings through hanging these prayer flags. Keep in mind that in the Tibetan calendar, that lunar calendar, there are some days that are not so auspicious for putting out prayer flags. It's good to avoid those, but prayer flags are, again, a practice that many people engage in and do. We also, of course, have prayer wheels. I mentioned earlier that one small prayer wheel that was at the beginning of tonight's slideshow here. We also have the huge prayer wheels here. There's a big one at Vajrapani. Um, Through Lama Zopa's insight, he decided that it would be really good to put the prayers, the mantras, and what have you on extremely, small print and microfilm and what have you. So there's like amazing amounts of mantras that are in these prayer wheels. And just spinning the prayer wheels with those thoughts of compassion for all beings is really powerful. Conducting animal liberation with mantras and prayers. Some of you know about the practice of animal liberation, but what you're essentially doing is you're taking animals who are in danger of losing their lives. So it might be going to, I don't know how many live animal markets we have in, the US these days. Certainly they exist in other countries, but sometimes they do sell live fish and what have you, or lobsters or other, animals, creatures that are going to be eaten. And you buy those beings and take them away from that situation of danger where they would lose their lives. And you don't just release them, that's part of the practice, to put them in a place where they will be able to live the rest of their lives without the danger of being eaten by somebody, thrown in a pot of boiling water or what have you. But you do practices with those beings. It's more just like I said with mantras, it's good to do practices around other beings who will benefit. If you have pets at home, have your pets there when you're doing your practice and reciting mantras, even if they're asleep. There's some subtle imprints from those words that are the essence of those Buddhas that has a powerful effect on them. In animal liberation ceremonies, you gather these animals together and you do practices with them. You might do circumambulations of stupas and what have you. I'm going to talk about that next in regard to holy objects. You can do all these amazing practices with them, and then you put them in a safe place. I know one of the popular ones we do in New Mexico is with earthworms in the summer, in particular, when many people go fishing. Many stores will have those little containers of earthworms, right? And it's kind of nice to get there early in the day and to kind of interrupt all the plans of these people who were going to go fishing by buying all the worms that are there. And then they come to the, tackle shop, bait and tackle, and they go, "Where are all my earthworms?" But you take those earthworms, and again, you do all these practices with them, and then you take them home to your compost pile or whatever, and you give them a nice, happy home with lots of wonderful things to eat and what have you. It's really a wonderful practice. Lama Zopa Rinpoche certainly encouraged it for creating merit and even for overcoming some of the obstacles people might have around their own health. Like if there are some people that would go to Lama Zopa with what advice to give them in regard to a cancer diagnosis or something that was happening, he would often say, do animal liberation. This is the most powerful way. By saving the lives of other beings, you're creating a meritorious seed that will ripen into saving your own life, helping your own good health in the future. And it all makes sense. It's all kind of in line with what we're talking about in terms of the principles of karma. Create kind of an opposing force. So animal liberation, once more, I'm not going to talk that much about it. There's a whole ceremony that you can obtain where you go through and recite different mantras and prayers with the animals. And then once more, find a safe place to liberate them. Don't just liberate them anywhere where they'll, potentially die. If it's a freshwater fish and you put it in the ocean, it's not going to survive. So, all of those things we need to attend to, use our wisdom. And real quickly, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but holy objects, Lama Zopa Rinpoche emphasized holy objects. Holy objects are like the Mahabodhi stupa that the prayer flags will be at tomorrow. These holy objects that we have in the Gompa here, all the statues and so on, these amazing representations of the Buddhas, even the texts that are here, all of these are what we consider holy objects. And you might think, well, is there something kind of mystical that makes them holy? Well, there is the fact that what they represent. You know, they get imbued with that to a large degree through everyone who is seeing them in that light. But nonetheless, because we are Buddhist practitioners coming here to study merit and look at this whole topic, we have to recognize the power of these holy objects to help us, to give us the opportunity once more to practice various things. So when I was talking earlier about making water bowl offerings, when you do it before these amazing holy objects and what have you, they're once more kind of there as a basis, a foundation for you to be able to engage in that practice. So it's good to do that. It's good to do circumambulations of stupas and so on. All of these things, once more, in Western terms, we don't think like that. We don't think, oh, I've got to go do these kind of different, unusual practices so I can have good things in my life and what have you. But that's how these holy objects work. They represent, once more, the beings that are the statues are made of and what have you. The Buddha of compassion that's over there, 1,000 arm Avalokiteshvara and so on. So making statues is a very powerful thing to do if you are inclined to make statues or even to commission statues. There's many places over in Nepal that where artisans who've been taught how to make these statues quite correctly will make quality statues for you. You commission those and then you have them on your altar. Satsas are these little kind of plaster of Paris creations that you do as a meritorious practice. They're not so involved as creating a whole statue. There's little molds for them, and you put them in the mold, and then when they're hardened, you can paint them and so on. I'm sure there's some around here somewhere, some satsas. And then any other images, particularly like tankas. Tankas are the paintings that you see in the Gompa here of various Buddhas. Once more, that might not be your skill to do an actual painting of one of these, but you can commission them. And there, again, that's kind of creating that positive energy, and especially having those in your shrine room where you do your practice and what have you, and then making offerings to them and so on. But all these things around holy objects are very powerful energy that you're creating. Let's go through the remaining ones quickly. Printing and reciting sutras and other Dharma texts. The Dharma texts themselves, of course, are holy by virtue of the words that they contain, the words of the Buddha and other great masters, treatises, and what have you. Oftentimes, people recite the Heart Sutra, recite other sutras. Those are very meritorious actions. Making pilgrimage to holy sites and circumambulating or prostrating to stupas and other holy objects. This is something good to do at least once in this life, to make a pilgrimage to many of the holy spots in India and Nepal, where the Buddha gave many of these discourses, and of course in Bodh Gaya, where he attained enlightenment and what have you. All of these are very powerful things to do in terms of meritorious actions. The last category that I can is just a catch-all for anything else that would fall into, and again, it's not by any means exhaustive, but these are other things that we can think about in terms of merit, is engaging in the 10 virtues. These are the opposite of the 10 non-virtues that the Buddha taught, that are the main ways that we get caught up in creating our own suffering and, of course, harming other beings. If we engage in their 10 opposites, the 10 virtues, well, that by its very nature is virtuous and meritorious, as well as taking vows to refrain from certain actions. The 5 basic vows that many people who are Buddhists take in all traditions. The very first one is to refrain from killing other beings. And that's one of our non-virtues as well. If we take the vow to not kill, we create a very powerful positive imprint, because it's not just us making a decision not to kill in particular situations. It's making a decision that we aren't going to kill at all. And so we live with that kind of energy, and it creates a constant force of positive potential. Vows are one of the most powerful ways that we create merit. There's those basic vows of the lay people as well as ordained, what are called the individual liberation vows. There are bodhisattva vows that are in the Mahayana tradition, and even tantric vows when you practice Vajrayana within the Mahayana tradition, the more profound tantric teachings. And of course, Tantra has its own presentation about accumulating merit through the practices that are taught in that. And I won't go into Tantra so much tonight. Um, the other two practices are things that we should be doing fairly regularly as well. And maybe we'll do this at the end of tonight if we've got some time. Rejoicing. Rejoicing is where we bring to mind the good things that we have done and the good things we have in our lives, as well as the good things others have done and what they have in their lives. And we rejoice in it. We be joyful about it. They say it's the antidote to being jealous of what other people have. If we really take delight in everything that other beings have created, the good results that they're experiencing, the positive actions that they're engaging in, it's a very easy way to make merit. And you just think about it. I encourage people at the end of every day to do some purification, and then to rejoice. Rejoice in your own actions, the good things you've done that day, and then also to rejoice in others that are, coming to teachings, that are doing the various things that happened today in Losar around the world and the various Dharma centers and what have you. And we'll do a little bit of that at the end of today if we have time for that. The last thing, of course, is dedicating. When we dedicate, and we'll do this as well at the end of the teaching today, we always do our best to dedicate. The idea is we're dedicating or sealing those merits so that they bring forth the best possible result. I guess if we use a worldly example for that, that's like securing all of your money, like making sure that, that no one can withdraw that money and take it away from you, in a sense. And moreover, that it will continue to develop the potential to produce the result. And there's not a perfect example for what merit is in our worldly affairs, but our merit can be destroyed. And that's, again, something I'm going to touch on tonight. So we have to be careful to make sure that we seal it with dedication, and that we have this concept. They often use the analogy of like a bucket, where you want to fill the bucket with water. Well, how is a bucket filled with water? But one drop at a time. Every drop we put in the bucket, we're going to dedicate so that it will eventually produce the full bucket being complete enlightenment. So at the end of each class or each session we do in our practice, we should always dedicate, always take the time to say, I'm sealing that merit, making sure that that merit is protected and that it will bring forth the result that I'm wishing for. What was our motivation at the beginning of our practice? That's what we're dedicating for. So if it was to become enlightened for the sake of all beings, we're now going to dedicate, with that thought in mind. So again, a very important practice. This kind of allows your merit to be somewhat protected and increased to some degree. All right. That was quite an exhaustive list of many things that we do to create merit. But once more, anything virtuous is essentially creating that positive potential. But moreover, if we do it with particular states of mind and particular things in mind, we can create even more merit. And of course, the most important one I want to emphasize of these four factors, these are four main factors that in the teachings on karma, they say they influence the weight of our actions, meaning how heavy our actions are in terms of the results we will get from those karmic seeds. The first one is the power of our intention or attitude. If we do actions solely for the happiness of this life, the Buddha said that's not even really that virtuous. In fact, it's non-virtuous because it's mostly about attachment, mostly about me getting what I need right now. If we do things with the motivation of our next life, that's at least being a little more forward thinking about what comes after this existence. And so it's not so much attachment as it is a virtuous state of mind of wishing for good results in our future existence. But if we think about liberation and enlightenment, those are much more beneficial things to keep in mind in terms of our intention. And of course, the most powerful is bodhicitta, is that wish to become enlightened for the sake of others. So Lama Zopa would frequently talk about how we need to have more what he called bodhicitta mindfulness. He had a bone to pick to some degree with this whole idea of mindfulness. Mindfulness has gotten to be so prevalent in our culture. I think one Buddhist practitioner coined it Mick mindfulness, like McDonald. It's just become a little more commercial than what it ideally should be. Mindfulness is a wonderful quality to have. Mindfulness of what, though? Rinpoche would always say. What are you being mindful of? You're just simply being mindful of your breath or mindful of something that is really not that important in terms of creating any real major positive potential. Well, then it's just a skill you have. It's not really anything that profound. If you're mindful of bodhicitta so that every action you do becomes infused with bodhicitta, then you're creating merit with even mundane activities. In fact, he put together this whole little practice. He derived these. You can maybe I'll even get this to Leah, and we'll have like the slides from tonight as well as this. We'll make sure that people have access to these files. But this is a little booklet he put together called Cultivating Mindfulness of Bodhicitta in Daily Activities. And this is where you take even just something ordinary that you do, like putting on clothes or turning on a light in a room, and you bring bodhicitta motivation to it. Um, Let me give you an example. Like when you do laundry, wash dishes, and so forth, meditate that the water is the complete stages of the path, all the teachings the Buddha gave that help us to kind of purify our minds. And then think, I am washing away all the stains of delusions of all sentient beings. Normally, if we're like doing dishes or washing our clothes or doing whatever, we don't think about anything, right? We kind of waste time. His whole point is like if you bring bodhicitta motivation to even your mundane activities while you're brushing your teeth or while you're even on the toilet. Let me find the toilet one. It's kind of interesting. Uh, where is that one? The idea is that you're working with the same concept of like going to the toilet. Um, says here, think that all the negative karmas, obscurations, sicknesses, and spirit harms of yourself and all sentient beings leave through your lower orifices in the form of urine or feces. It descends, enters the gaping mouth of the Lord of Death, Yama, who anyway, the idea is as you flush and close the lid of the toilet, imagine his mouth closes and is sealed with a very heavy golden double vajra. There's more instructions than what I've read here, but I mean, you can be really quite creative with all of this, but the whole idea is you're trying to think about every act you do enhancing the well-being of sentient beings or removing what is causing pain and difficulty for sentient beings. So you make your actions very, very powerful. So getting back to that first factor that makes your karma heavy, if you engage in actions with bodhicitta, you're in creating unbelievable merit. Now, so any of those things we've talked about tonight, making off water bowl offerings, circumambulating a stupa, whatever the case might be, hanging prayer flags, if you do it with bodhicitta, you are creating unbelievable merit. Why? Because first of all, the result that is behind that mind is the optimal result. It's the final result, enlightenment. But moreover, it's enlightenment for all beings. So you are working with this amazing, like, platform of all sentient beings that you are basing that thought on. Whereas if you do things that are solely dedicated for your own liberation or for even just your next rebirth, that's really mostly about you, right? It's not really about other beings. Sure, you'll be out of samsara, you'll be out of your suffering or whatever, but you really want this mind of bodhicitta. That's why it's so important that we spend time cultivating that mind. And the Buddha gave very detailed instructions on how to do that. I won't go through all that tonight. But that's this first one, our intention or motivation, particularly with regard to the mind of bodhicitta, can bring unbelievable weight to our actions. So we create incredible merit. Um, the second one is the power of the object. And this is where we go back to that idea that our gurus are very powerful objects for us, Buddhas, bodhisattvas, these beings who have attained great realizations. Our parents, monks and nuns. Monks and nuns would be more powerful than our parents, but nonetheless, I mentioned our parents earlier as that field of benefit that we have also some positive merit accumulated through attending to them, offering to them, but the object does make a difference. Now, they tend to put like all the human beings first and then the animals are last, but I don't want to in any way diminish the importance of caring for animals because there are so many beings who need protection, right? And even human beings, of course, too. I'm not saying that they don't. But the idea is that when we deal with beings who are quite vulnerable and who it's important to attend to their needs because otherwise they will die. Well, that's a very powerful karma that we create. So don't get too hung up in this idea of some sort of order of what beings should be in. If you are inclined to help animals, as my friend Amata is, who's listening tonight, I see her coming in from Santa Fe, um, then this is, something to be really happy about, that you are able to help beings who really need your assistance, who would die again without your care of them. So she runs a sheep sanctuary, by the way, but it has many animals. She was over 108 animals that she had, different animals that she keeps there. Many of them rescues from, places where they would have died had it not been for her amazing care. So I don't want to get too hung up in that one. Know that still, if we think about our gurus and pleasing our gurus as we do whatever we're doing in relation to the object, that's a very powerful thing. And of course, if we've got bodhicitta motivation, extremely powerful. Power of the subject means if we hold vows, and I talked about vows earlier. If you hold vows, then of course your actions become much more powerful because you have that continuity of that wish to refrain from negativity. Then the power of the phenomena or the substance of the action. In terms of merit, the idea here is that it is said to be more virtuous to give more profound substances, if you will. Well, substance is a weird word here. But if we talk about generosity as an act, you can engage in generosity of giving material things or money, right? That's what we often call generosity. But they say the most profound way that we can give is to give the Dharma, to give teachings to others to help them to achieve liberation and enlightenment themselves, right? That's going to solve their problems in a much better way than giving food or what have you. But again, don't neglect the food and the other things that are needed by sentient beings, but recognize that the most powerful substance we can give, in a sense, is the Dharma, are the teachings that will help beings at a much deeper level. So this is the way that it's taught there. Again, there are other ways that it's taught in terms of certain actions, but we should always think about doing the most beneficial things for others in terms of our acts of generosity, kindness, what have you. So these are four factors that do influence the heaviness or the weight of our karma that we're creating that will have a profound impact on the merit that we've done. Of course, leading us into what we're doing here tonight as the beginning of this part of the calendar, the lunar calendar, it's also said to be more meritorious to create virtue on what are called auspicious days in the lunar calendar. And again, those do have to do with the fact that you have, with the moon's effect on the earth, different forces that are happening at a subtler level to sentient beings. That's why in even in Tantra, they say practice on particular days of the month is more powerful because of the way that things are sort of lining up in regard to the effects of the month of the moon on the earth and so on. So these are the ones that are highlighted in particular in regard to the lunar calendar. We are again starting a brand new lunar calendar today. So days 1 through 15, which is again this Friday through 2 weeks from today, Friday, those 15 days, especially the 15th one, it's called Chotrul Duchen, which is usually translated as Day of Miracles, but they often call all 15 of these days of miracles. It is a very powerful time to practice. So once more, try to engage in as many of these activities, do whatever you can, try to avoid non-virtue on any of these Buddha days. We have what is often considered the most powerful day of the year, day 15 of month 4. That's going to be on June 11th, I think, this year. What's called Sakadawa. That day commemorates the birth of the Buddha as Prince Siddhartha, and then his enlightenment, and then his parinirvana, his passing from this world. So it celebrates those three major events in the life of the Buddha. A very powerful day for practice. I think it's on like a Wednesday or something this year. So, but hopefully you can find some ways to maybe come to the center here or wherever you have a center locally to engage in activities on Sakadawa, which is that again, the full moon of the fourth month. Then we have day 4 of month 6, which is 49 days, I believe, after Sakadawa, called Chokor Duchen, which represents the very first teaching that the Buddha gave. After the Buddha became enlightened, it said that he didn't teach initially because he thought perhaps the profundity of what he had realized wouldn't be realized by other beings. But then he remembered his compassionate wish to benefit them. And after these gods kind of beseeching him to teach the Dharma, he decided to do so. And that was the beginning of his turning of the wheel of Dharma. So again, they have it as 49 days after I think it's 49. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe I need to check my math on that. But essentially, every year we celebrate that period of time afterwards when the Buddha's teachings began. Then there's one more day that represents when the Buddha came back from the realm where his mother was reborn. His mother died shortly after his birth, and she was reborn in what's called the realm of the 33, this God realm. These aren't gods in the sense of a creator God. These are just deities that have this particular karma to have a more blissful existence, though they haven't attained enlightenment. Day 22 of month 9 is when we commemorate that event in the Buddha's life. And then, of course, there's also anniversaries and birthdays of holy beings, such as Lama Tsongkhapa. This is often happening around Christmas time. Actually, this past year, it was on Christmas Day that we celebrated that. And then eclipse, full moon, and new moon days because of once more the effects on beings in the world through the moon. How do we keep our merit from being damaged real quickly? Refrain from all those heavy negative states of mind. It said that anger is one of the worst to destroy our merits, especially if we're getting angry at a being who is one of those powerful objects for us. So try to keep our anger somewhat curtailed. And also what's called wrong view, which is where we have some false views around karma and rebirth or whatever, and we're holding to them very tightly. If we have some things that we don't quite agree with in Buddhism or that we can't get our heads around yet, just set them aside. Don't throw them away and don't get angry and upset at them or whatever. And hold an incorrect view. Instead, just acknowledge that maybe over time I'll see that differently. Maybe I can get my head around rebirth or karma at some point in the future. So it's important that we do have some kind of security and safety to our karma, our merit that we're creating, so that we're not destroying it. And of course, dedicating, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the powerful ways that we make sure that that happens. I think that was everything I wanted to cover. I unfortunately went right to the end of the class pretty much. Got a little advice from Rinpoche, but let me hold off on that and see if there are any questions or comments. So as you can see, the question of the course, what's merit got to do with it? An awful lot. It's kind of the short answer. And we have a lot of ways that we can create it. So kind of, I don't want to make it sound really harsh or anyway, but we'd be a bit foolish if we didn't take advantage of this human life that we have, where we have the ability to want to do all of these things, or at least some of these things, to not do those. Teresa, you have, did I pronounce that right, Teresa?
You did. Teresa
Ah,
is just right. Thank you so
okay.
much. It's
You're
wonderful
welcome.
to be with you. You mentioned it's probably super simple, but I've never heard it before. A single pointed request to your teacher or to a Buddha. I've
Mhm.
never heard that before. I don't know what that means.
Well, it means that when we are doing our practice, that we kind of focus on our teachers, our gurus, that are the source of so much of our knowledge and inspiration, and really request their inspiration and blessings. I just did the whole course in discovering Buddhism for the center up in San Francisco. I'm visiting there later in March to help with like a practice day on it. It's the whole module on the spiritual teacher. Spiritual teachers do play a pretty prominent role in regard to our spiritual development. And the idea is that there is something kind of intangible about that relationship. It's not something we can put our fingers on and identify it, that we call inspiration or blessings. The idea is that I think in the Sanskrit it's abhikasheta or something. I can't remember the exact term, but they I don't want to make it sound too esoteric, but the idea is that by virtue of that relationship with those beings, we are in the position to receive their blessings and inspiration. That is not, again, something that we can point at, just like merit. I mean, merit isn't something like I can say, oh, there's your merit, and there's, your merit being decreased or whatever. It's something that we sort of trust is going on to some degree, but we can feel it often. And when we are in the presence of beings that inspire us because they played a pretty prominent role in regard to our spiritual development, we can feel that there's some energetic connection going on there, if you will. I don't know how else to put it into words, but the idea is that this blessings, inspiration, a way that sort of they are a conduit to help us to receive what will be beneficial to us in our spiritual path. And we have to sort of set ourselves up in a position to receive that. How do we do that? By making requests. Right? For example, if you're really struggling with emptiness, maybe you have some desire to study it more or whatever, but you find that even as much as you study, it's really kind of a hard concept to get and whatever. Well, then you might make single-pointed requests to your guru, as you are engaging in your meditation to receive their inspiration and blessings to realize this. I know it sounds a little weird, but there's some energy transference that happens there on the basis of the position that they are in and the fact that we're setting ourselves up to be able to receive that, saying, please bless me with that. Please do what you can from your side. This is the one thing that I think in the West, we tend to think that, yes, you do achieve enlightenment through your own efforts, absolutely, but it's not completely independent of anything else. That's in fact what emptiness is talking about, that nothing is existing in an independent way. So essentially, we do depend upon our gurus and the Buddhas and all these holy beings to help us. Otherwise, it doesn't really complete the picture either. If we want to become a Buddha so we can help others to become enlightened, well, then we have to think about how we are being helped by Buddhas and gurus and what have you to become enlightened ourselves. So the primary mechanism for doing that is to make requests to them and say, please bless me. I'm really having a hard time developing compassion for this person or that person or whatever. Please help me, bless me to, so I can generate those realizations and change my own heart and my own mind. Again, it's not something we're used to. And when we learn things in the West, right, you don't go to your university professor and say, please bless me so I can realize calculus. It's just not something we do, right? But in terms of spiritual development, it's an important part of all of it. Otherwise, we're never really going to get that energy, those blessings, that inspiration to achieve these realizations. Does that make some sense, Teresa?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, there's a wonderful book that we used for that module by Alex Berzin that's called Wise Teacher, Wise Student, where he does talk a little bit more about this idea of inspiration and blessings. It's not the whole of the book by any means. There's a little passage in there, but even if you go to Alex Berzin's website, studybuddhism.com, no gap in there, just one word, studybuddhism.com, and put in a search for um, blessings, inspiration, or something, I think you'll probably get it because I think he has most of the teachings in that book on that website. You might find some more information there that's useful to inspire you to seek inspiration from your gurus. So, any other questions or comments? Ah, yes, please.
Could we have you speak into the mic so our Zoom
Oh,
family can hear as well?
oh, great. Yes, thank you for reminding us of that,
First
Tyler.
off, I wanted to provide my appreciation and gratitude for the presentation that you gave. This is actually my first time experiencing anything from Buddhism. I'm not practicing, and
Okay.
this all happened by happenstance. I'm actually staying here,
Oh, you are.
um,
Oh,
and but I've been struggling with work. I work at Google, and there's been a lot of stuff that's just been really stressful for me. So I had to spend time in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and then in my Airbnb, it had listed this location, and I was like,
oh,
oh, I'm gonna stay here for a night. And then I looked on also the event page and
uh,
signed up for it. But nonetheless, it's been very helpful for me energy wise, both from a positive standpoint,
good.
the conversation, but
Uh-huh.
also just being in the grounds and everything. So I appreciate you. I have much gratitude. I'm looking to learn more when you all
Okay.
share this stuff. But yeah, that's it.
Good, good. What's your name?
Ray,
Ray. Yeah. Good to meet you, Ray, and I'm glad you're here. Are you staying for a little bit of time or
staying tonight.
tonight?
So
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I'll probably stay
Yeah.
for the days.
Yeah. But I mean, maybe you've already, it sounds like from what you've experienced just being here on the grounds and everything that you can see some of what I've talked about in terms of how these holy objects and being in a space like this and surrounding ourselves with all this is a positive influence on us. And then we feel better about what we're doing in the world and what have you. And it can help to clear some negativities and obstacles that we're having. So good. I'm glad that you came tonight. So thank you. Appreciate that. Anyone else, anything to add?
Don, I had a quick question about
Sure,
the
Tyler.
preliminary practices.
Uh-huh.
Can we do those without a teacher or guidance in our lives, or what's the best way to go about that?
Well, it's certainly always beneficial to have somebody playing roles of teachers for us. One of the things Alex goes into in that book is different levels of teachers. You know, if we talk about somebody who we might consider a guru or lama, which is a pretty high level, I mean, somebody who really is having a much more profound impact on our lives, then those are not essential to engage in the preliminary practices, but nonetheless would be useful. Again, different preliminary practices require different things in terms of our ability to do them, or, I'm thinking in particular of like Vajrasattva mantra, which is one way that we purify using the mantra of that being who represents purification. And then it's ideal if we've been given sort of the oral transmission of that mantra from a lama so that we have kind of the continuity of that, the connection to that. Not essential again, but still very beneficial. So it really depends upon the particular practice. But of course, we have to learn how to engage in these practices from someone. I mean, you can learn them from a book, I suppose, and FPMT, again, has published pretty extensive commentaries on how to do most of the preliminaries. I think the one where they haven't published one that I keep bugging them for is the mandala offerings, which is, again, quite complex. So it's good to have some kind of connection with teachers to know what you're doing because they're not just hollow actions, as I was pointing out. When you're doing the water bowls, there's all the visualizations and the thoughts and everything that go with it. When you're doing the mandala offering, there's even more of that. It's extensive visualizations. So you learn them initially maybe by doing them as more mechanical, but then over time they become richer and richer practices. So but having teachers give at least some advice and guidance on how to do them is useful, certainly. Yeah. Did you have something specific in mind, Tyler, on that or?
I was just wondering if there was just a suggestion around having a specific teacher, or say, for example, today
Hmm.
we received direction on from the Sangha on how to make water bowl offerings.
Hmm.
And so that was nice. But just for anybody who's listening or anybody who maybe wants to develop a practice at home
Mhm.
about the water bowls, like you were saying, I was
Uh-huh.
just wondering if there was a place to,
Mm,
like maybe an FPMT resource to read about that,
yeah,
or taking direction personally or transmissions from a
absolutely.
teacher.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, if you go to the FPMT's website, in particular to what we have as our shop, where all these digital resources are available, there's one that's called Altar Setup and Water Bowl Offerings. There's another on preliminary practice of prostrations, preliminary practice of Vajrasattva. I mean, all these various things are listed there. You know, you can find them all there. I still think even if you read those, it's useful to, like what you did today, of being here with people who have been doing these practices for some time and showing you how they actually do them with their hands-on type of stuff. I will mention, I'm not trying to plug myself by any means. Please don't get me wrong. I'm just offering resources. The next module I'm doing for of Discovering Buddhism for San Francisco starts on March 17th, I think. And it's the establishing a daily practice. And I'll go through doing water bowl practices and things like that. You know, so there is an opportunity to do that. And I think you all are offering Discovering Buddhism with Ocean of Compassion, and that module will come along here as well. So don't think that, you know, there's only one opportunity to do that. We do try to offer, you know, regular instruction on how to do these various practices to some degree. So we should conclude. We've gone way over. I'm sorry, 10 minutes. So let's do just a mini rejoicing. Just rejoice that you were here tonight. You know, each of you thinking about yourself. This isn't, you know, conceit or anything. This is just really acknowledging how good it was that you're tending to yourself in very wholesome ways by being here, learning about merit, learning about this important feature of the Buddhist path that will be so essential to our own happiness and, of course, to the happiness of others. And then rejoice in each other, every one of us who is gathered here tonight. How amazing, how wonderful. And rejoice in all the other things that have gone on this auspicious day. People involved in various centers doing practices, pujas, what have you. How wonderful that beings are engaged in this. And of course, think about beings who are feeding those who are hungry, who are tending to those who are unhoused, who are treating those who are ill in various parts of our world. You know, dealing with the war torn and so many people suffering from a variety of things in our world, all the natural disasters, what have you, all the good acts of beings, regardless of who they are. It's amazing that beings do this, that they have this desire to benefit each other. And just rejoice in this. Be really joyful thinking about the positive things, the good things that we and others do. Now let's dedicate this merit. We won't use a standard prayer for this. We just dedicate all this positive potential that we've created by being here tonight and even in this rejoicing, so that we ourselves can become enlightened as quickly as possible and then help all sentient beings to attain that same state. Then we can dedicate for the good health, long life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, for all his holy wishes to be fulfilled for all the beings of this world. And then also for the very swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, our spiritual director. Okay, good enough. All right. Thank you all so much for joining tonight. And I'll look forward to seeing some of you hopefully over the time that I'm here. I'm glad that I actually taught tonight. Sometimes when I fly into a place to do teachings, I don't like teaching that evening because it's a lot, to fit into your day. But I think I made it through okay. Didn't misspeak too often, hopefully. All right, everyone, be well. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Leah and Tyler.